You are traveling to another train of thought, one not from this century and challenging the status quo. You are now entering the paradigm shift.
Well, good morning. This is the Paradigm Shift on the Cerberus Radio Network. It is Friday, August 10th, 2018. I am doing a live show this morning. I had the time, and as far as I know, I haven't heard back otherwise. Suzanne will be doing a show at 10 a.m. Eastern. So, as usual, that means around quarter of, I will be leaving this show. I will be cutting this show short. It'll go back to replay for the last 15 minutes. I'll get everything set so that Suzanne can go on live right at 10 a.m. Listen to our radio co-feed often. There's always something on. I have been updating a lot of the shows. Have been putting new Brush Fires of Freedom by Sean Hoffine out of Arizona. His new most current shows are up on the radio co-feed now. We also, the last part of that hour is the Friday Gold wrap-up from Peter Schiff. It is a podcast done by Mike Meharry, but it's for Peter Schiff, and if you want some economic news, go and listen to that. Also, during the day, you'll find Mike Meharry's podcast, and whenever he has a new one, I add it to the loop, and there's, oh goodness, there's got to be 10, maybe, I don't know, there's at least 6 or 8 podcasts. It's on for 2 hours, and there's a bunch of podcasts in that time period, and I add new ones throughout so listen to that. Mike Meharry's on. We have the Mike and Suzanne show. If they're not live, there's some rebroadcasts in there. We have the other side. I think Mike and Justin are occasionally going to be doing live shows at 9 p.m. Eastern. 9 p.m. Eastern. So there's always something on, and we always try to post out when there's going to be something live. So if you're following us on Facebook, which I ask you please do, follow us on Facebook, you can find out when the live shows are, because they're always posted about an hour before we go live. You'll find the links, because that's when I get everything set up and I get this YouTube set up. And so you can watch on YouTube, you can listen on Radio Co. The links are always there. There's a app for the radio for CRN that has the Radio Co. in it. So all you do is hit the play button on the app and it'll take you right to Radio Co. If you miss any of the shows, we also have SoundCloud. We have almost 90 episodes on SoundCloud now. That keeps going up. And if you go to YouTube and subscribe on YouTube, you can find probably about 200 episodes. The Renegade and Rambler show with me and Daniel. You'll find the Paradigm Shift, the Wasatch Report, the Mark and Suzanne show, pretty much everything, the Bailey Report. Pretty much everything that's on, you can find all the old shows there. And as I said the other day when I was on with Mark, you can watch some of these old episodes and laugh because, quite honestly, they're pretty funny because we really were – this was a learning experience over the last couple of years. We're almost at 2 years that we've been doing this. And when we started, we were lucky to have 3 or 4 listeners. And last month, we had about 15,000 listeners on Radio Co. So, and that's all because of you. You guys have been sharing the show. You've been listening to the shows, and we thank you very much. And continue to listen. Listen on Radio Co. It's a great feed. It has great sound. And you don't have to watch on YouTube. Especially if you're on limited bandwidth or limited data, we always share a low data stream too. So there's all kinds of options out there. All right. I think that's enough of that. Again, we are in a growing stage. We're going to have a web page before too long, a .com. Hopefully, we are trying to expand what we are doing. We're also trying to expand the number of live shows, and if not live, at least podcasts, people will be recording and will be new content added. And as we really ask that if you're even interested, just contact Suzanne or I or Daniel, and we'll try to work out the details and get you on the air. Because obviously, I'm not a professional. I have no experience with this. And if you're a tech person, honestly, we need some tech help, because everything we do is pretty much, Daniel and I, and recently it's just been me because Daniel's job has kept him away. And so we are at a crossroads where the tech is killing us because we can't take phone calls well, and that is making this very difficult. So if you have some tech experience in the radio field or just have knowledge in the tech field that would benefit to help us grow, we would really appreciate your assistance on it. All right. Let's go ahead and get started to the stories or the articles for the day. Excuse me. All right. This is by Tyler Durden, and this is off of Zero Hedge. I only present this because I disagree with some of his premise on this: Assange, InfoWars, and the Constitution. So you can see right off the bat, you know where this is going, and why I have. I just don't agree with it. All right. So this morning I woke up, looked around me, and saw a world sinking into a quagmire of voluntary censorship, a world willing to let someone far away choose what it can and cannot see of itself and about itself. A world that no longer appears to recognize or care that this goes directly against its founding principles of liberty, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. I'll keep going. I can think of many reasons why someone would want to ban InfoWars and Alex Jones, and I don't even know them other than from incidental tweets and comments. But I also acknowledge that is not the point. Just because you would like to ban a person or an organization, just because you don't agree with them, doesn't mean you can and should be able to. If Facebook, Google, Apple, Spotify, Pinterest, all within hours of each other, think it's a good idea to ban Jones regardless, they had better do a lot better than saying something about violating their community standards, quote unquote. They should identify specific instances where these alleged violations take place, identify them publicly. You can't ban anyone on vague standards, quote unquote, from media that cover half the planet, because that's a danger to the entire planet and to all mankind. As Facebook and Google are very busy lobbying Washington, Brussels et al. To drop any antitrust charges against them, let them continue to be private enterprises. They are shirking ever close to the various intelligence communities. I'm going to stop there. This author is basically saying that these private companies are violating the Constitution. He goes on to say basically that. I don't want to read that entire article. I hate just sitting here and reading an article to you. You can read the article. It's on Zero Hedge. And again, it's Assange, InfoWars, and the Constitution by Tyler Durden. So, did these outlets violate the First Amendment? Let's ask that question a different way. Did those bakers in those various states that were sued in federal court violate someone else's right to have that service provided for them? Because it's the same thing. It's a private company providing a service. If they decide they're not going to provide the service, that's their business model. Now, did the federal courts get it right in fining these bakers for not providing a service for someone? No. That is it's their right to deny service. It's their right to discriminate. Guess what? You discriminate every day. Oh, you can have coffee today or you can have a tea. You just discriminated. You discriminated against tea because you had a cup of coffee. Am I going to watch this show or am I going to watch that show? You discriminated against a show you didn't watch. We discriminate in everything we do. Discrimination is not a bad thing unless you're using it for evil, such as like the Ku Klux Klan. They were using discrimination for evil, but we discriminate every day. And the fact that these Christians did not want to engage in accepting, because that's what they were being forced to do. They weren't being asked to bake a cake, they were being forced to accept a lifestyle that it goes against their religious beliefs. Because honestly, this whole thing, I had an article here somewhere. Matter of fact, I don't even think I printed it out. Justin shared it in our chat group. It was from Illinois, I believe it was Illinois, where a school district is allowing a person of a gender other than the one they want to use the bathroom. So I can't remember the article entirely. I can't remember if it was a male using the female bathroom or a female using a male bathroom. I don't remember. Doesn't matter? No, doesn't matter. But again, here we have courts forcing a view on us that isn't our view. Are we discriminating against this person? No. We are practicing discrimination, but we're not discriminating against them because they're a male or they're a female. They don't belong in that other bathroom. Just because they have a mental illness that wants to say that, oh, I'm a male or I'm a female when they aren't, that isn't something that is protected. Just as because these bakers didn't want to bake a cake for somebody because of the lifestyle that they're forcing on us, because we aren't being, it isn't about us accepting or tolerating. Let's use the correct term. It's not about tolerance. Honestly, I don't care if two men want to be together. That is between them and God. And it's not any, as a libertarian, it's none of my business what they do in their private space. Where I do have an issue is when they decide that they're going to force me to accept their lifestyle and to participate. And that's what this whole thing with these bakers is. So, okay, so back to the point at hand. Are these outlets violating the First Amendment? If you take the wrong worldview of the Bill of Rights, you're going to sit there and say, yes, the Constitution gives me a right to freedom of speech. Well, that's the wrong view of the purpose of the Bill of Rights. Again, we sound like broken records at times on here because we say this all the time. And it has to keep being said until people start to understand it. I know a lot of you listeners, you Ariane, Andrew, and all you guys, I know you understand this. And it's just a rehash of what you already know. But there's others out there, new listeners all the time. We actually have, I was just looking at our reports the other day. We have almost half of our listeners, if you can believe this, 53% of our listeners are in the United States. 40-something, I can't remember the exact number now, 40-something are from Canada. Almost half of our listeners are in Canada. In Canada, obviously, there is a thirst for freedom and liberty. And people up there aren't getting it either. Their government is just as tyrannical and evil as this government, forcing people to deny their faith and their deeply held convictions. Okay, so there's people out there that aren't Christians that have moral values that say abortion is murder, or that men using women's bathroom is not correct. So, all right, I'll agree to that. But what it really comes down to is a lot of people have Christian values that are being denied their natural right to worship as they see fit. And government's forcing them to accept a lifestyle they don't agree with. Now, are these guys, again, breaking the First Amendment? So no, you got to go to the preamble. The preamble says that there were restrictions on the general government. There's not a list of rights that this government is giving you. And again, here is why it's not rights that are granted to you by government. But first, the first is, did these rights exist prior to the Constitution? Was there freedom of press before the Constitution? Absolutely. Was there freedom to practice religion as you saw fit prior to the Constitution? Absolutely. Was there a right to keep and bear arms for self-preservation and to defend against tyranny before the Constitution? Absolutely. So, did the Constitution give you anything that wasn't already there? No. So, that is number one. These are pre-existing rights that government had nothing to do with. You already had them. They're natural. Jefferson called them unalienable rights. We call them natural rights. Some people call them God-given rights. They are inherent in you because you're a human being and alive. The problem is, today, people keep saying, oh, I have a First Amendment right, or I have a Second Amendment right, or a Fourth Amendment right, or a Fifth Amendment right. No. Those are restrictions on the general government. You had natural rights that pre-existed the Constitution. So, number two, does government grant rights? Well, if they do, they're civil rights because they're coming from civil law. They're not natural rights then. If government grants a right, and if you're saying that you have a First Amendment right, government gave you that right, then you are conceding to government the power and the authority to regulate that right, to restrict that right, and even take that right away. So, government did not give you that right. Let's look at the First Amendment. I often say, if they're granting rights, and the preamble, if you're not going to accept the preamble for what it says, that the framers of the Constitution, fearing that there'd be misconstruction and abuse of powers, wanted further declaratory and restrictive clauses. If you're not going to accept those words, because that's what it said, the misconstruction and abuse of powers, and further declaratory and restrictive clauses. Those are quotes. If you aren't going to accept that, then why are the first 5 words of this First Amendment, first 5 words, Congress shall make no law? So who are they aimed at? The power that made law. And as we said before, there aren't 3 co-equal branches. The legislative branch was intentionally the most powerful branch. The president enforced the laws that the legislature, as the executive, he executed the laws that the legislature passed in accordance to the Constitution. If it was outside the Constitution, they shouldn't be enforced. And that would be the president should not enforce unconstitutional laws. Also, the courts were not designed to be a veto over the legislature, in that it can create new legislation. Yet that's what we have today. They legislate from the bench. You have 9 politically connected lawyers in black dresses that legislate from the bench. So no, These organizations did not violate the First Amendment. What they are doing, though, is purging any opposition thought to the Marxist point, the Marxists, because they are Marxists. They believe in socialism. As Mark and I were talking about the other day, they are now openly just espousing Marxism and saying that I'm a Marxist. Look at all these people that are running as outright Marxists. There's no shade on it anymore. They're saying what they mean and meaning what they say now, and they don't care. They know that the education system has indoctrinated enough generations now that the vast majority of people are fine with Marxism. Even you conservatives, quote unquote conservatives, are good with your level of Marxism. You are fine with a standing army committing acts of war on people we have no declaration of war against all over the world, spreading liberty and freedom through the bomb. You're good with that, even in spite of the fact that the founders feared a standing army more than just about anything. Just read some of the founders and what they said about standing armies. Google that. Start reading what they said about standing armies. One of the quickest ways to lose your freedom and liberty. I can't remember if it was Jefferson or Madison said that standing armies are the tool of the tyrant, or something along that line. I paraphrased it, but that is basically what he said. I started reading this article the other day, and it is from the Abbeville blog, Leftist Crazies Don't Want You to Exist. I didn't get very far. I ran out of time. I'm going to try to get to this article early enough in this hour that I can get to the points that need to be made out of it. And I am going to read probably the last half of this article because it's very good. And it's from the Abbeville blog, and it's by Boyd Cathy on July 5th, 2018. So you can go to Abbeville, look for their blogs, and you should be able to find this article. It's a good article. Go ahead and read it on your own. Print it out, share it with friends, or just share it on your timeline so people can read this. I thought that I'm going to pick up about where I left last week when I did the show. I thought that would end it, but it did not. And before I could steal away, she uttered in a rising crescendo, "You must be a Trump supporter!" Exclamation point, quote unquote. As I continued to move away from her, I nodded my head. So he nodded his head as an affirmation. And then, so quote, "Trump supporters are effing fascist." He obviously left out all the letters there in the article. "You neo-Confederates are racist!" Exclamation point, quote unquote. She angrily shouted, and I thought if I didn't move on quickly, she might slug me with her handbag. There it was, from this respectable-looking lady who probably was around 60, certainly not impoverished materially, most likely college or university educated, a member apparently active as well in an established mainline Protestant church, the F-bomb, quote unquote, uttered at a stranger, someone she had just casually met getting out of his car on a hot summer day in Raleigh, North Carolina. She had never seen me before, unless extremely doubtful. She had attended a Confederate flag event. She didn't know my name, but she understood correctly that I was a Trump supporter, quote unquote, in 2016. And obviously, with that Confederate license plate, well, then I was the epitome, the symbol of all that stood in the way of her goal of remaking America into a cultural Marxist utopia. Full equality, question mark? And I was reminded of the equality pictured by various writers who had either experienced the communist kind or who were wise enough to understand what it meant. George Orwell's depiction in his fanciful novel Animal Farm, but even more aptly, perhaps, Crossler's dystopian novel Darkness at Noon, 1940, a thinly veiled account of Stalin and his great purges, or even more by the late Spanish traditionalist Rafael Gambra, In his marvelous volume El Silencio de Dios in 1967, which desperately needs an English translation. I don't think that protesting woman, despite her probable university training and membership in the UCC, would have fathomed any of those writers, anything those writers wrote, or understood anything they were saying, and she would never understand that Southern heritage means and encompasses. What I found perhaps most disturbing in this short encounter, and something not even the Stalinists of old were guilty of, was the near complete decline linguistically in language. How had things in our society degenerated so far that a perfect stranger would, after less than 2 minutes of conversation, decide to unleash the F-bomb on me? Has our national discourse declined this far? And in reflecting, the answer is a definite yes. And all we need to do is make a cursory search online or via the television of just recent statements and implications uttered by more noteworthy minions of the left in American society. Just before I began writing this column, I was able to go online and find about 15 instances in which the foulest four-letter words were spoken publicly to national audience or to large groups online recipients. Online recipients. Robert De Niro or Peter Fonda, anyone? And no, I do not accept the faux argument that it was Donald Trump who began all this decline and abuse of the English language. This degradation was there in full force long before he even became president. It was there in the dialogue sequences of almost every Hollywood blockbuster since at least 1980s. It was there in our college campuses, in countenances by the professorate. It was there in our culture. It was there for years in the vicious attacks on Confederate heritage and our symbols. All Donald Trump did was tear off the scab, which thinly disguised the gutter mindset of our supposed political and cultural and educational arbiters. His unanticipated and unexpected presence in the White House infuriated and maddened them, forcing them as the fetid pus under the scabs to come forth in all their, oh my goodness, oliginous, never mind, in all their stench and foulness. He's using words that I don't even know what that word is, so forget it. In their stench and foulness. So in this age of Donald Trump, I should have expected that peace demonstrator I encountered, that self-proclaimed pacifist and anti-racist social justice warrior advocating for equality and justice, quote unquote, to act exactly as she did. Her vaunted and repeated deep concern and desire for equality and for dialogue does not include me or the millions like me or you. Only if we repent continuously for our past sins of racism, repent for our multiple sins of all our white ancestors, and for the white privilege we somehow enjoy, although I'll bet my meager retirement income is far less than that lady's financial resources. Then there might be a tiny glimmer of hope for us in that lady's view. And even then, with the goal of open borders and long-range population replacement strategy left, whatever I could say would surely mean little to her. In the end, we are in an immense battle, a cultural war to the death. What Pat Buchanan wrote about and described back in 2002 in his volume, The Death of the West, and in subsequent words, such as the brilliant Paul Gottfried has documented in his critical studies on the intellectual earthquake that has shaken Western Europe and American civilizations to its foundations. In the end, one side must win and one side must lose. It's that simple. The article is Leftist Crazies Don't Want You to Exist. So why did I read that? In relation to the whole story of the suppression of thought that is not Marxist thought. Because the left does not want us to exist. They will use any means they can to defeat us. And at the end, he's right. One side must win and one side must lose. That is, if we continue down this path. As Mike and I were talking about it the other day, it's coming to the point where it's going to, there's only one solution to this. Because, honestly, think about this, folks. Do you have anything in common with the Massachusetts liberal? Again, that word means nothing. Let's just change it to what it is. The Massachusetts Marxist. Do you have anything in common with the California Marxist or the Seattle or wherever it is along that left coast Marxist? Because I know that Oregon and Washington, that the eastern halves of those states are very, quote unquote, conservative. Again, another meaningless term, because most conservatives are conserving their brand of Marxism. As I started at the beginning of the show, try to do anything without the Marxist Republicans seeking to pass some law to control what you do. And that's really what it comes down to. The Republicans and Democrats are all Marxist for the most part. There may be a couple, 3 or 4 in Washington, D.C. that aren't. The numbers are very, very small. But even so, even libertarians, and I'm more closely aligned with libertarian than I am Republican anymore. But even libertarians, that's why I couldn't vote for him even. Johnson in the last presidential election, because Johnson and his running mate, and I can't remember his name, and who cares? They were Marxists as well. They were good with using government to push their libertarian ideals on people, just as Republicans and Democrats are willing to push their Marxist ideals on people using government. Johnson and them were just as much in that camp as well. They believe that government should force people in the states to accept homosexual marriage. I mean, look at his platform. It's right there. That's why I couldn't support him, because he would use government to push his agenda. That's not libertarian. That's Marxism as well. That's the problem with parties. But we are at this point where we have a crossroads. We're going to have to make a decision. What are we going to do? Are we going to keep going the way we are? Because the Marxists are going to win. Doesn't matter. Because for the most part, most people have been indoctrinated, are happy with their Marxism. Yeah, and okay, let's go here. I'm going to go here. Let's talk about the Pledge of Allegiance here. I know this is going to upset someone out there, but look it up. I'm not going to say anything here that isn't historically correct. Look it up. Who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance? A Marxist, a socialist. And why did he do it? By his own admission, he did it to indoctrinate children. In his article, he wrote about the fact that they couldn't change the minds of the adults. The adults were fixed. They couldn't do anything about the adults. So the founding ideals that were still in people's mind, because this all happened in the late 1800s. He wrote that in 1890 something. He wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. And he wrote it full well knowing that people still understood the founding principles, that the states were sovereign and that the federal government was supposed to be just an agent for the states. Even though that the Civil War had just recently ended back in the 1860s, just 30 years prior, most of them were still alive. Most people were alive to see the end of the Civil War. That would be at the time when he's writing this Pledge of Allegiance. Even though that the North subjugated the South, states that had seceded, become their own free and independent nations in a confederation, united together in a confederation. Quite honestly, That's what we have. Supposedly, we're united in a confederation. We're confederated together. We're a union of 50 free and sovereign nations. In theory, again, I've said often, I have the article laying over there in my pile of prep, the article about Switzerland. I've said often that Switzerland got federalism in practice. We got federalism in theory. So we have to go at some point and decide, what are we going to do? And it really is going to come down to, we must separate, because we just don't have anything in common with these people. They want to destroy us. They want to subjugate us. So Marxists, their only goal is to rule over others. Period. Where if you apply federalism, you have very small, very limited government. They're just to perform the tasks that need to be done to keep civil order. So you need some sort of laws, and you might need some sort of local, very small law enforcement. And you will need some sort of self-defense. So again, no standing army, you would have a militia. That's how this original union was designed, to have local militias that were called up to service if they were needed, if the Congress declared war. But we never got federalism. We got a national government right out of the box. Just look at Washington's response to the Whiskey Rebellion. It was a local issue. The governor of Pennsylvania could handled it. But Washington sent federal troops without them being requested, because in the Constitution there is a provision that the federal troops could be sent to put down insurrection if it required the state to request them. So right from the get-go, within 6 or 7 years of the Constitution being ratified and put into practice, because it's not law, it is a blueprint for government. So after it's put into practice, the agent is created. Within 6 or 7 years, the agent is subjugating citizens of the states. So we can look back at Brutus, and so let's see. We had Brutus, which I believe was Governor Clinton from New York. We had others. We had Robert Yates. We had a whole bunch of anti-federalists that were warning about what would happen. And again, Patrick Henry, you can't go and talk about the anti-federalists, the actual federalists, without talking about him as well, and George Mason and others that warned of this very thing. And within just a few years, it was already going off the rails. So let's just move on. I had a break queued up, but at this point, I have about 5 minutes. I want to get to this article. I don't even remember where this is from now. And it doesn't even say who wrote it on here. Okay. Democrats don't fear Brett Kavanaugh. They fear the Constitution. The other day, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in Israel to receive an award for her commitment to Tikkun Olam, to heal the world in Hebrew, a spiritual concept that progressive Jews have long distorted so that their malleable religious views could better align with the leftist orthodoxy. Well, I can't speak English today. It's a sort of convenient philosophy that allows traditions to be subsumed by the vagaries of contemporary politics. So it is with an increasing number of Democrats in the Constitution, a document they believe must. Okay, let's see here. So it is with an increasing number of Democrats in the Constitution, a document they believe must bend to the will of their policy preferences rather than preserve legal continuity, limited government, and individual liberty or Enlightenment ideals. Sure, some of the anger aimed at Donald Trump's nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court is bipartisan bluster meant to placate the activist base. Still, most Democrats are going to get hysterical about any pick because any conservative pick, again, a meaningless word, was going to take the Constitution too far literally for their liking. Just like Scalia, right? Suzanne joined in here. I know she's here. Just like Scalia and his... she's doing one, and it's going to come out here shortly. I know she's working on it very diligently about Heller, the Heller case. So anyway, any conservative pick is going to take the Constitution far too literally for their liking. For those who rely on the administrative state and coercion as a policy tool, forcing people to join political organizations, forcing them to support abortion, forcing them to subsidize socially progressive sacraments, forcing them to create products that undermine their faith, and so on. That is a big problem. Some, like former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, indulged in histrionic rhetoric we've come to expect in the Trump era, claiming that Kavanaugh would threaten the lives of millions of Americans for decades to come. But almost none of the objections come from leading Democrats were even ostensibly about Kavanaugh's qualifications as a jurist, or for that matter, with his interpretation of the Constitution. Specifically, prospective presidential candidate Kamala Harris argues, as a replacement for Justice Anthony Kennedy, his nomination presents an existential threat to the health care of hundreds of millions of people. Surely, the former Attorney General of California comprehends that health care is not a constitutional right, but rather a policy concern whose contours are still being debated by lawmakers and probably will be for decades. I'm running out of time. I'm not going to read that entire article again because I hate reading entire articles. Are the Democrats, and for that case, the Republicans, afraid of the Constitution? I just got done saying that not within 7 years of the Constitution's ratification and being put into effect, that Washington, in contravention to the Constitution, sent federal troops to deny people their right to redress of grievance. 7 years. Here we are, a couple hundred years out, a couple hundred years plus, obviously. Do the Republicans and Democrats, specifically this article is talking about Democrats, again, doesn't matter. They are both two sides of the same Marxist coin. Do they fear the Constitution? Obviously, the answer is no. They don't give a rat's furry behind about the Constitution because they use the elastic clauses to great effect. And Mark and Suzanne listened to that show the other day, talked about one of the elastic clauses and how perhaps it is so elastic that Madison and Hamilton actually put in something that gives them the authority to do everything they're doing anyway. Because we know that those two wanted a veto over the states. Those two wanted a strong national government. And it was rebuffed and voted down every time that it was brought up at the Philadelphia Convention. But obviously, they put in enough vague wordage in the Constitution that even within 7 years, Washington was breaking the Constitution. The limits placed on him and on the general government in the Constitution. And here, 230, 40 years later, whatever it is, 220 years later, we have a government that has no limits whatsoever. They do whatever they want, whenever they want, and they don't care. We have presidents that say they have a phone and a pen, and they'll do whatever they want. We have people that are supporting Trump for somehow. The other day I had that discussion with somebody that said that, well, Obamacare is gone and now we have Trump care. And well, how did we get that? Well, it had to be by Obama just voila, here it is. Because Obviously, there was no legislation repealing and replacing Obamacare. They certainly did not repeal it as they promised they would do. So you have to ask, why didn't they repeal it? They have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House. They can repeal it right now. It could be gone. Why aren't they? Because they're in on it. They're all in on it together. It's all about control. They control you. If they can deny you health care, they own your life. And they can deny you health care. They control your money. They steal from you constantly. They're stealing from future generations. We're almost $22 trillion in debt. They have the standing army. They control you. This is open tyranny. Just, again, go back and read the founders and their discussion of standing armies. Well, I don't know where time goes. Because here we are. It's been over 45 minutes. I said I was going to bail out around quarter of. And here it is, getting closer towards 10 of. And I'm going to reset. Suzanne will be back here in just a few minutes. I never got to this article on the 3D printing again. Something that it's just ridiculous. It doesn't mean anything. It's just more distraction. I had a good time. I hope you did. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned, because in just a few minutes, Suzanne will be back with her show. And I know you don't want to miss it, because I know she's going to talk about Colorado or her trip. I know she's going to talk about some more about this whole purging of thought. Have a good morning. I will talk to you later. This is the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.